So in my video I did earlier, I was saying how this was the Israelites when they were screaming out to God to come and save them. They had to be that broken, that hopeless, that helpless, because this is total dependence. This is we're so hopeless. The identity and ego has been stripped away. Can't really have identity and ego. So then God's like, okay, now we can get to work. And then they spent the 40 years in the desert, and he was building them up. And so I said that that's what Exodus reminds me of, is toddlers. Spiritually, they were toddlers. Biblical maturity. By the time they got to the promised land, I would say they were, like 13, 14, spiritually speaking. By the end of the Old Testament, they were maybe 15, 16. Okay, spiritually speaking. I'm going to tie this into today because I put up earlier about Greg Abbott and this partnership with Turning Point. So see, it's because of stupid people, especially men, that do this. And yes, the left does it, but this is how stupid and many of these people claiming to know God and Turning Point. Sure, Charlie Kirk didn't know God. Like, it would be good if people could get to such a biblical, mature place that they know the shepherd's voice and they realize that God intervened to purge wicked from his midst. He did. He was not going to let. He gave enough time there. He did. And he kept going down this road of wanting to take everybody back, way further back. So God was like, I'm done. And yet, what does this wicked world do? The Turning Point's the Erica Kirk. And I would normally say nothing, but again, God wants biblical maturity. All of those people put him on a pedestal like they did with Kennedy, okay? And now Abbott doing this whole venture with Turning Point. God gave you dominion over the land. He sure as shit didn't give you dominion over others. And you wrap it up just like the left does in all these ways. Oh, your activism. Oh, stop it. Now you're going to do it in high schools. So see, God eventually, because man, especially man, doesn't get it. This is the danger man was always going to have. So in the Old Testament, I've said before, God was starting with the men because they got the harshest punishment. God said, you're going to curse the land because God never told them to rule over women. Never. He was warning Eve, but they don't think. So in the Old Testament, you have a ton of rituals, a ton of rules, a ton of laws, okay? That's what you have to do with a toddler. And God does always want total dependence on him. He does. But you have to start here, okay? So he's starting with the men then, okay? Because he knows that by Jesus is going to bring the heart, but it's going to really, the heart is going to be with the women. Because there is no union with just staying in the Old Testament. There isn't, because they all still had a heart of stone, except for very few. So by the end of the Old Testament, they were like, at the most like 16, okay? Then there's the 400-year silence. Then Jesus arrives, and women were thrilled, most especially when they realized he was God. And it didn't take them much to realize it. Again, because we don't know that women had more empathy prior to the original sin. Likely the reason women have always had more empathy, something Charlie Kirk thought was a New Age thing, was, but he's like a Pharisee. But is because there's been the inherited oppression they've lived under, not just by the Roman Empire, but by the Jews too, by the Pharisee. Because it was just, was the standard. That shouldn't even be called into question. Of course, men are over women. That was where men were going to make their biggest mistake. They're big, and they still are making it today. So when God saw what Turning Point and Charlie Kirk, the direction, and Erica Kirk were going, oh, no, God intervenes. And you should recognize, and when he intervenes, he'll do it in front of you. Not to hurt you, but if you have biblical maturity, you're like, God's trying to purge the evil from our midst. And yet they're still moving forward with this Turning Point bullshit. So anyway, God, of course, women were so happy to see Jesus. Why? Because it was the first man. And then when they find out it's God, that's treating them as an equal, is giving them roles they were never given before, is letting them learn right next to men. It was unheard of. So of course women would easily embrace that. And they are the ones that easier, because of empathy and sensitivity, they can receive and hear the shepherd's voice easier. The Pharisees, on the other hand, had, because again, the age, where's the spiritual maturity? I would say women were spiritually more mature, actually, believe it or not, because they were able to receive God on another level altogether. And what's the goal God's always working for? We need to bring union back. So men, on the other hand, you have to realize spiritually, they're still thinking, no, where's the gifts? You're supposed to bring us gifts. Because what do you do with a toddler in the Old Testament? When they do good, when they do their rituals, when they keep the Sabbath, when they keep all the laws Dad says, here's a gift. So they would be blessed with gifts. Yes, jewels, whatever, okay? They would be blessed with things. But we're moving on because we're maturing. So especially the men, who really weren't men, they were just maybe, like 18, say like 18, okay? Actually, that's probably what a lot of them were that followed Jesus, was 18, 19, 20, okay? But maturity level of the Pharisees, like 18. No biblical maturity at all, okay? They're still set, no, God, you're supposed to come and fix it, and then you leave again, and then we'll run it. And God is like, yeah, no, we're not doing that anymore. We're not doing that. You have shown for 6,000 years that you didn't realize I didn't want you dominating over anyone. Most especially when you're not getting it. Why? But why? God knew why they wouldn't get it, because they needed to know him, which is why Jesus came. Which is why more women followed Jesus. Because the men were still saying, no, we want the Old Testament. We want our gifts because we kept the Sabbath. And God was saying, no, we're moving on. So women of all ages welcomed Jesus easily. Again, because it was the first man in 6,000 years that wasn't oppressing them, that didn't see them as less than. The men through all those years. And I think that God is going to break them. He's going to break them for them to get it. To realize that you need me too. The women easily received it. The men, no. The men just wanted to find problems everywhere because it wasn't the way they wanted it. And they're still doing that today. The answer the right has to the left is to do the same thing the left was doing, but they think they're right on their side, when really all should be surrendering to God. But man will be the hardest to break. He always has been. I don't know how God will do it, but he will. He'll break them. He will break them. Especially with this Turning Point, because they most especially wanted to take everything further back, and God had made all this progress with women being brought up to equal status, all because his end goal is that I need both equals so we can come into union. I can't have this ridiculousness anymore. And Greg Abbott and Turning Point, this is who they are. This is who they are. So I don't know how what he will do, but he's not going to tolerate it anymore, most especially with tech and AI. So I would say, there's going to be some major changes happening at some point in the near future from God.